Today we are discussing about the need for exception handling. The Python categorizes exceptions into distinct types so that the specific exception handler can be created for each type. The exceptions occurred in the program. They are always categorized by Python. The second point, the code written for error detection and making the correction. That code is always separate from the main logic of the program. It will be written as a separate module in the program which acts whenever requirement of handling the exception is needed. The compiler or interpreter always keeps track of the exact position where the error has generated or occurred, on which line the error has occurred. That information will be kept. The exception handling can be used for both user defined and built-in exceptions. Coming to the process of handling the exception. When an error occurred, the Python interpreter creates an object called exception object. This is more important. When an error is occurred, the very first thing is the Python creates an exception object. This object which is created due to the error in the program will be handed over to the runtime system, so that it can find an appropriate code to handle this particular exception. This process of creating an exception object and handing it over to the runtime system is called throwing an exception. Now we are clear about what is exception object. This will be created when an error is occurred. The same exception object is handed over to the runtime system so that it can find appropriate code to handle this particular exception. This process of creating an exception object and handing it to the runtime system is called as throwing an exception. Coming to the fourth point, the runtime system searches the entire program for a block of code called the exception handler that can handle the exception raised. If the suitable exception handler is found in the call stack, it is a memory area where number of methods are there to handle the error. If a suitable handler is found in the call stack, it is executed by the runtime process. This process of executing a suitable handler is known as catching the exception. When an error is found, it is very necessary to find a suitable handler. If the suitable process of executing a suitable handler is found, it is called as catching the exception. If the runtime system is not able to find an appropriate exception after searching all the methods in the call stack, then the program execution stops. This is the simple process that how the exception handling mechanism is there. Remember, the very first thing, when error is occurred, an exception object is created. It is handed over to the runtime system. These two processes called as throwing an exception. Then the runtime system searches for the entire program for a block of code which can handle this situation. If the suitable handler is found in the call stack, it is executed by the runtime process. This process of executing a suitable handler is known as catching the exception. If the runtime system is not able to find an appropriate solution, what we call a particular exception handler needed for that is not found, then the program execution stops. This is the mechanism of what we call process of handling exception. Look at this diagram. When error is found in a method, creates an exception object. Then it will be handed over to runtime system. When an exception object is created, it means that an exception is raised. These two processes called as throwing an exception. The runtime system searches for the exception handler in the particular current method. If it is found, then it executes the code. If not found, it will go for call stack to search for a particular exception handler. If it is found, that will be given to the executing code. Then the program executes. If the particular method is not found to handle the exception, then the program stops. This is what we call the exception handling mechanism. See, please subscribe and like, share and make your comments to improve better.